You're listening to Audiology. Support our work on Patreon and be sure to submit your requests for topics in the comments below. Let's talk about the famous Lewis and Clark Expedition, or as it was formerly known, the Corps of Discovery Expedition. This journey was a major United States effort to explore the vast lands to the west that became part of the country after buying the Louisiana Territory. A team of elite members from the U.S. Army and civilian volunteers, led by Captain Meriwether Lewis and his good friend Second Lieutenant William Clark, were chosen for this mission. Clark, joined by 30 individuals, set off from Camp Dubois in Illinois on May 14, 1804. They met up with Lewis and 10 others in St. Charles, Missouri, and from there they traveled up the Missouri River. They crossed a major landmark, the Continental Divide, near the Lemhi Pass, and made their way to the Columbia River, finally reaching the Pacific Ocean in 1805. Starting their return on March 23, 1806, from Fort Clatsop in Oregon, they concluded the mission by September 23 of that year. President Thomas Jefferson initiated this expedition soon after the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. His objectives included mapping out the new territory, finding a practical way to traverse the western half of the continent, and laying down an American claim to these lands before European nations could stake their own. There were also scientific and economic items on the agenda, like studying the region's plants and wildlife, understanding the geography, and beginning trade with the Native American tribes living there. When the expedition wrapped up, they didn't just come back with stories. They returned to St. Louis with maps, sketches, and journals ready to report to Jefferson. Jefferson had an ambitious plan in mind. He was on a quest to discover the most straightforward water route across the continent that would boost trade. He also knew it was vital to proclaim U.S. authority over the areas inhabited by numerous Native American tribes along the Missouri River, and to fully understand the value of the resources within the Louisiana Purchase. While the expedition did make important scientific discoveries, those were bonuses. Science wasn't their primary purpose. Thomas Jefferson had a fascination with the American West for many years, inspired by tales of exploration. While serving as minister to France in the 1780s, he discussed a potential expedition to the Pacific Northwest with traveler John Ledyard. Jefferson's interest was further piqued by works like Captain James Cook's A Voyage to the Pacific Ocean and Lepage Dupratz's The History of Louisiana, which he read with great interest. Jefferson wanted to find a direct route to the Pacific, similar to Captain Cook's ambitions. Alexander Mackenzie's journeys, which led him to the Pacific coast in British Columbia in 1793, proved to Jefferson the urgency of securing American territories to dominate the profitable fur trade. Before his expedition became a reality, Meriwether Lewis was tasked by Jefferson, who was by then president, to gather supplies in Philadelphia with the help of Israel Whelan. They secured various items like portable soup, tobacco, high-proof alcohol, and presents for indigenous peoples, along with medical provisions and camping gear. Jefferson took his proposal to Congress, but he was discreet about his true intentions due to political tensions. Congress approved a budget of $2,324 for the expedition, leaving Lewis to oversee the expenses. Jefferson appointed Meriwether Lewis as the expedition's leader due to his knowledge in natural sciences and his outdoorsmanship, which Jefferson praised for its thoroughness and suitability for the task. To ensure Lewis was well prepared, Jefferson arranged for him to get additional training in Philadelphia. Under experts like Benjamin Rush, Lewis studied medicinal treatments, and with other specialists, he enhanced his understanding of navigation, botany, zoology, and geology. Lewis wasn't a novice when it came to science. He was a capable learner, especially under Jefferson's mentorship at Monticello, where he had access to abundant resources on North American geography. The journey began with the construction of a keelboat near Pittsburgh, which was finished and loaded with provisions on August 31, 1803. In the same city, Lewis acquired a Newfoundland dog named Seaman, who later proved indispensable to the expedition, especially with his hunting aid and protection against wildlife. The journey kicked off with the team sailing down the Ohio River to meet with William Clark in October 1803. Their mission was monumental: to explore the newly acquired lands of the Louisiana Purchase, establish trade and U.S. sovereignty with the indigenous communities along the Missouri River, and stake a U.S. claim to the Pacific Northwest. Jefferson saw gathering scientific data as a way to strengthen the U.S. claim, but was primarily focused on mapping a navigable route to the Pacific and advancing commerce. To foster relations with native tribes, the team carried Indian peace medals featuring Jefferson's likeness, along with a display of military might that included advanced weaponry like the Girandoni air rifle with a 20-round magazine. The explorers were well equipped with firearms, flags, gifts, medicinal supplies, and tools necessary for their long voyage. The journey of Lewis and Clark was partly inspired by the route taken by Montauk Ape a century earlier, according to a book in Jefferson's library and a copy carried by Lewis. While the exact path they took traced the Missouri River to the headwaters and then to the Pacific via the Columbia River, Lewis and Clark may have been under the impression from earlier accounts that they could simply portage from the end of the Missouri to the Columbia, not realizing the challenge of crossing the Rocky Mountains that lay in their path. On May 14, 1804, at 4 p.m, the Corps of Discovery, led by Clark, left Camp Dubois, also known as Camp Wood. They set sail up the Missouri River, maneuvering their keelboat and 2 smaller boats called pirogues, and made it to St. Charles, Missouri. It was here that Lewis caught up with them on May 20th, and together they continued their journey the next day. The team was made up of as many as 45 people, including not only soldiers but also civilian volunteers, officers, and Clark's enslaved African-American man named York. As they traveled, they passed through areas that are now known as Kansas City, Missouri, and Omaha, Nebraska. Tragically, on August 20, 1804, Sergeant Charles Floyd died, likely from acute appendicitis. Floyd had been one of the earliest recruits for the expedition and became the only casualty of the journey. He was laid to rest on a river bluff, now named Floyd's Bluff, in present-day Sioux City, Iowa. The group honored him with a cedar post grave marker that was engraved with his name and the date he passed away. Nearby, they camped by a river, which they named Floyd's River. Toward the end of August, the Corps reached the edge of the Great Plains, teeming with wildlife including elk, deer, bison, and beavers. The success of Lewis and Clark's expedition depended largely on establishing good relationships with the Native American tribes they encountered. Without the assistance of over 24 native nations, the team might have struggled to survive through harsh winters or gotten lost in the enormity of the Rocky Mountains. One tense encounter was with the Lakota Nation, also known by the expedition as Sioux or Teton-Wan Sioux. Historian Harry W. Fritz explains that the Sioux had been described as a dominant and assertive group, known for trying to block free river trade. They were also bracing for an attack from the Omaha tribe in response to a recent Sioux raid. During discussions near the meeting point of the Missouri and Bad Rivers in modern-day Fort Pierre, South Dakota, the two groups came to a head. An incident involving a missing horse, believed to be taken by the Sioux, led to tensions. Negotiations turned demanding, with the Sioux wanting the expedition team to either stay or offer more gifts for passage through their land. In Clark's words, the situation was precarious, as he described the Sioux as warlike and called them the vilest miscreants of the savage race. Despite several close calls, no battle ensued, and the expedition pressed on into Arikara territory. Meanwhile, back in March 1804, before the expedition's departure, the Spanish in New Mexico were warned by General James Wilkinson of the American expedition, considered an intrusion on Spanish-claimed lands. In response, on August 1, 1804, the Spanish sent out 4 armed groups from Santa Fe, totaling 52 soldiers, hired soldiers, and Native Americans, led by Pedro Vial and José Jarve, with orders to capture Lewis and Clark and their team. They reached a Pawnee settlement in what's now central Nebraska, only to find that the expedition had already moved through the area. The Corps was making impressive progress, traveling 70 to 80 miles a day, rendering the Spanish efforts to intercept them futile. During the winter of 1804 to 1805, Lewis and Clark's team set up Fort Mandan close to what is now known as Washburn, North Dakota. On April 7, 1805, as they got ready to leave, they shipped a keelboat back to St. Louis, which carried a collection of specimens, including some that had never been seen east of the Mississippi River. There was an incident where a local chief requested a boat to travel through his lands, leading to a tense standoff between the explorers and the Native Americans. Fortunately, the conflict did not escalate, and both sides eventually retreated. The group quickly moved on, heading west and setting up camp for the winter within the Mandan Nation's region. Once they settled in, they were visited by Native Americans from nearby areas, with some even staying overnight. Lewis and Clark had several meetings with the Mandan chiefs over a few days. It was during this time that they met a French-Canadian fur trapper named Toussaint Charbonneau and his Shoshone wife Sacagawea. Charbonneau started working as the group's interpreter. The sharing of a Mandan ceremonial pipe helped establish peace between the explorers and the Mandan chiefs. By April 25th, Captain Lewis had compiled a report detailing their progress and their observations of the various Native American nations they had encountered. This report, titled A Statistical View of the Indian Nations Inhabiting the Territory of Louisiana, covered a wide range of information, including the names and locations of tribes, their trading habits, and the water routes they used. President Jefferson would later present this report to Congress. Following this, the expedition continued on, tracing the Missouri River to its source, crossing the Continental Divide at Lemhi Pass, and heading north to Traveler's Rest. They then crossed the Bitterroot Range at Lolo Pass. The team had to travel on foot from there before taking canoes along the Clearwater, Snake, and Columbia rivers. They went past Celilo Falls and near what is today the city of Portland, where the Willamette and Columbia rivers meet. While navigating the lower Columbia River, they relied on the notes and maps created by William Robert Broughton in 1792. The sight of Mount Hood and other volcanic peaks reassured them that they were nearing the Pacific Ocean. On November 7, 1805, an expedition laid eyes on the Pacific Ocean for the first time, and 2 weeks later, they arrived at its shores. They endured a harsh second winter camped on the north side of the Columbia River in an area plagued by storms. A critical issue they faced was a shortage of food. The elk, which was their primary source of sustenance, had migrated to the mountains, and they lacked the resources to buy enough food from the neighboring tribes. On November 24, 1805, the group decided it was best to relocate their camp to the south side of the Columbia River, close to what is now Astoria in Oregon. Both Sacagawea and Clark's enslaved man, York, were given the opportunity to participate in this decision-making vote. Once on the south side of the Columbia River, they built Fort Clatsop about 2 miles upstream from the mouth of the Nettle River, which is today known as the Lewis and Clark River. They needed the fort for shelter and safety, and also wanted to claim this land for America, symbolized by the American flag they raised over the fort. While hunkered down for the winter at Fort Clatsop, Lewis devoted a lot of his time to writing, documenting valuable information in his journals, particularly about the region's diverse plant life. The health of the expedition members worsened, with many suffering from colds and flu. Aware that fur traders often visited the lower Columbia River, Lewis and Clark inquired with the local Chinook people about any trading ships. They found out that Captain Samuel Hill had been in the area earlier in 1805. However, due to a misunderstanding, Clark recorded his name as Haley. Captain Hill actually returned in November 1805 and anchored about 10 miles from Fort Clatsop. While the Chinook told Hill about Lewis and Clark, no direct contact between them occurred. During this time, a Russian maritime expedition led by statesman Nikolai Rezanov also reached the mouth of the Columbia River. Unknown to each other, Rezanov and Lewis and Clark were both in the vicinity. Rezanov had traveled from Novoarkhangelsk, presently known as Sitka, Alaska, with the intent to start a Russian agricultural colony to combat the recurring food scarcities in Russian America. He even considered moving the capital of Russian America from Sitka to the lower Columbia River area. However, as his ship, the Juno, couldn't cross the Columbia Bar, Rezanov redirected his plans towards California. This change, of course, ultimately contributed to the establishment of Fort Ross in California. Lewis had his mind set on staying at the fort until April 1st, but he was really eager to get going as soon as he could. By March 22nd, the stormy weather finally let up, and on the morning of March 23, 1806, Lewis and his team started their journey back home. They used canoes to go up the Columbia River and later continued on foot. Before they left, Clark handed a letter to the Chinook people to pass on to the next ship captain who came by, who happened to be Captain Hill, the same one who had been in the area over the winter. Captain Hill took the letter with him to Canton and made sure it got sent to Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson received the letter even before Lewis and Clark made it back. The Corps reached Camp Chapunish in Idaho, right on the north bank of the Clearwater River. There they obtained 65 horses because they needed to cross the Bitterroot Mountains, which are on the border of what we now know as Idaho and western Montana. But there was an obstacle. The mountains were blanketed in snow, so they couldn't cross. On April 11th, while they were waiting for the snow to melt a little, Lewis's dog named Seaman was stolen by some Native Americans. Fortunately, they recovered him quite quickly. Lewis was concerned about more trouble like this, so he made it clear to the chief that any further mischief would be met with immediate death. On July 3rd, as they were preparing to traverse the Continental Divide, the Corps divided. Lewis wanted to explore the Marias River, so he took a smaller group with him. They encountered some Blackfeet men, and at night those men attempted to steal their weapons. Regrettably, during the altercation, 2 Blackfeet were killed. Lewis, along with George Drouillard and the Field brothers, ran for over 100 miles non-stop before they felt safe enough to camp again. Meanwhile, Clark ended up in the territory of the Crow tribe. One night, half of Clark's horses disappeared, even though they hadn't seen a single Crow person. Lewis and Clark did not reunite until August 11th at the confluence of the Yellowstone and Missouri rivers. Shortly after their reunion, one of their own hunters, Pierre Cruzat, accidentally shot Lewis in the thigh because he mistook him for an elk. Once regrouped, the Corps proceeded quickly back on the Missouri River. They finally returned to St. Louis on September 23, 1806. The Corps successfully reached the Pacific Ocean, mapping the area and setting the stage for the United States to claim the land legally. They managed to build diplomatic relationships and start trading with at least 24 local indigenous groups. Although they didn't find a direct water route across the continent, they discovered a trail used by Native Americans, which connected the Missouri River to the Columbia River, leading to the Pacific. Along their journey, they gathered a wealth of knowledge about local wildlife, plants, and geography. They came back with various samples of plants, seeds, and minerals. Their maps detailed not just the landscape, but also the locations of mountain ranges, rivers, and the homes of numerous Native American tribes. The Corps took meticulous notes on the languages and customs of the native peoples they met, and returned with a collection of artifacts such as bows, clothing, and ceremonial robes. The Lewis and Clark expedition was a groundbreaking journey that really helped us understand the geography of the Northwest and provided us with the first reliable maps of the area. Lewis and Clark themselves created about 140 maps during their travels. The historian Stephen Ambrose highlighted that their work filled in the main outlines of that part of the country. The team also recorded numerous natural resources and plant species previously unknown to those of European descent, though indigenous peoples were already aware of them. These explorers achieved several firsts. They were the initial Americans to cross the Continental Divide, lay eyes on Yellowstone, enter Montana, and write the first official descriptions of these areas. Their voyage to the west, along with the maps they produced and the symbols of sovereignty such as medals and flags they distributed, were all fundamental legal steps in claiming the lands of various indigenous nations as per the doctrine of discovery. The entire expedition received support from the American Philosophical Society, and Lewis and Clark were given instructions in diverse scientific areas including astronomy, botany, and zoology prior to their departure. They encountered more than 70 Native American tribes and documented upwards of 200 new species of plants and animals during their expedition. Taking inspiration from European colonization methods, President Jefferson instructed Lewis and Clark to assert sovereignty over the lands and demonstrate their military strength to affirm that the native tribes were under the authority of the U.S. Owing to the maps they drafted, the territories they mapped became accessible for further exploration and colonization in the years following their expedition. In 1807, a member of the expedition named Patrick Gass, who started as a private in the U.S. Army and was later promoted to sergeant, published a narrative of their adventures. Later in 1814, Paul Allen compiled a 2-volume history of the expedition. It was printed in Philadelphia, but neglected to acknowledge the true author, a banker by the name of Nicholas Biddle. Fascinatingly, the complete official report took even longer to reach the public. The earliest sanctioned edition of the Lewis and Clark Journals is housed at the Maureen and Mike Mansfield Library at the University of Montana for those interested in reviewing it. President Jefferson tasked the expedition with acting as a watching eye, reporting on the location, military capabilities, daily lives, activities, and cultures of Native American tribes in the territories of the Louisiana Purchase and the broader Northwest. The expedition aimed to inform these tribes that the United States now claimed their lands and that President Jefferson, referred to as their great father in Washington, was their new leader. The explorers, carrying blank journals and ink, documented their encounters and gathered scientific knowledge along the way. They brought gifts like medals, ribbons, and mirrors to smooth negotiations with Native American leaders. The team met various Native nations and tribes who usually helped them, sharing wilderness tips and aiding in food acquisition. Although these tribes often had positive ties with British and French traders along the Missouri and Columbia rivers, the expedition did face a serious standoff with the Teton Sioux or Lakota tribe on September 25, 1804. Led by Chiefs Black Buffalo and the Partisan, the tribe demanded compensation for passage over their river. Historian Harry W. Fritz noted that the Teton Sioux, an influential tribe wary of free river trade and expecting retaliation from the Omaha tribe for a previous raid, posed a well-known threat. Captain Lewis's attempt to appease the Sioux leaders with gifts backfired, as the partisan chief felt insulted, setting off a tense moment when warriors seized their boat. Lewis and Captain Clark diffused the situation with a show of force, avoiding violence through negotiation, improved gifts, and whiskey. Following encounters also required diplomacy and gifts like tobacco to avoid conflict. Throughout their journey, the expedition noted the lifestyle and social norms of the tribes they encountered. To Western eyes, these cultures appeared starkly different. For instance, men often had multiple wives, especially among the Minnetaree and Mandan tribes, and it wasn't uncommon for men to marry within their immediate family, such as sisters. Though female chastity wasn't highly prized, daughters could be sold for horses or mules, a practice common among the Sioux but not the Shoshone, who valued their women more. The explorers observed that many tribes, especially the Sioux, were frequently at war with others and learned about the devastation brought upon tribes like the Cahokia, Missouris, Illinois, Kaskaskia, and Peorias by these conflicts. Sacagawea, whose name you might also see spelled as Sacagawea or Sacagawea, was a Shoshone woman born around 1788. She sadly passed away on December 20, 1812. She played a significant role in the American expedition to the Pacific Ocean, as part of the team led by explorers Lewis and Clark, along with her husband Toussaint Charbonneau. Let's talk about when Sacagawea was about to become a mother. On February 11, 1805, not long after she first met Lewis and Clark, she began a tough labor. Her husband suggested they try a rattlesnake rattle remedy to help her, and luckily, Lewis had some on hand. Thankfully, after taking this unusual medicine, Sacagawea had a healthy baby boy who was named Jean-Baptiste Charbonneau. Now, fast forward to June 16, 1805, when the expedition was at the Marias River and Sacagawea fell very ill. She managed to get a little better by drinking water from a sulfur spring nearby. While there's a lot written about Sacagawea, experts warn us that not all of it's true. It's been made clear that although she recognized some landmarks, she wasn't the expedition's guide. Her value came from her skills as an interpreter and her contributions in other areas such as easing diplomatic tensions. Her presence, along with her infant son, helped signal peaceful intentions to the Native American nations they encountered. Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, the expedition leaders, had different opinions of her. Lewis wasn't entirely positive, but Clark thought highly of Sacagawea and even helped support her children later on. In their journals, they referred to Sacagawea and other Native Americans using outdated and offensive terms like square for squaw and savages. A man known as York, who was enslaved and owned by William Clark, played a significant role in the famous Lewis and Clark expedition. York was more than just a servant on this journey. He was very well received by the Native American tribes they encountered, as they had never before seen a black man. He was also incredibly helpful when it came to hunting and the physically demanding task of pulling boats against the current. Unfortunately, even after the expedition was over and others involved were rewarded generously with double pay and land, York did not gain his freedom from Clark. While the other members of the Corps of Discovery were acknowledged for their contributions, York received nothing. Clark only permitted York a short trip to Kentucky to reunite with his wife, and then required his return to Missouri. There's a heart-wrenching quote that highlights York's continuous struggle. 10 years after the expedition's end, York was still enslaved, working as a wagoner for the Clark family. The last chapter of York's life is wrapped in mystery. In the 1830s, there are stories of a black man who claimed to have been part of the Lewis and Clark expedition. This man was living as a chief among some of the very Native Americans that the expedition had met, but this was all occurring in what is now known as Wyoming. Whether this man was York is uncertain, but it's a poignant conclusion to the tale of a man who made significant contributions yet was recognized so little during his lifetime. 2 months after the expedition was over, President Thomas Jefferson addressed Congress for the first time about it. He briefly mentioned the trip's success before he began explaining the costs. During their journey, Lewis and Clark learned about many Native American tribes that were previously unknown to them. They discovered how to trade with these tribes, identified good trade routes and locations, and managed to describe the geography of the area they traveled through with accuracy. Their findings in botany and zoology generated a lot of excitement among the American Philosophical Society, who requested samples, artifacts traded with the Native Americans, and detailed information on the plants and animals they encountered, as well as the seeds they collected. Jefferson himself planted some Missouri hominy corn and other seeds at his home in Monticello, subsequently observing and noting them as an excellent food source. The expedition contributed to establishing a U.S. presence in the newly claimed territory and laid the groundwork for further exploration, trade, and scientific efforts. After their trip, Lewis and Clark escorted Mandan Chief Shehaka from the Upper Missouri to Washington, D.C. to meet the Great Father. Returning Chief Shehaka to his home was a challenge that necessitated multiple military campaigns. On returning, Lewis and Clark faced difficulties preparing their journals for publication. Eventually, Clark enlisted Nicholas Biddle to edit them, culminating in the publication of the History of the Expedition under the commands of Captains Lewis and Clark in 1814. Nevertheless, Biddle's edition omitted many of their botanical and zoological discoveries, which meant that for nearly a century, many of these findings were rediscovered by others and given alternate names. It was not until the early 1900s, with a publication by Reuben Gold Thwaites, that the full extent of their scientific contributions was appreciated. For an extended period, there was scant reference to Lewis and Clark in history texts. Even during the grand centennial celebration of the U.S. in 1876, their story was barely mentioned. However, with the onset of the 20th century, their significance as pivotal American explorers gained recognition with events like the Louisiana Purchase Exposition in St. Louis and the Lewis and Clark Centennial Exposition in Portland. Initially lauded more for their pioneering spirit and biographical tales, subsequent studies have delved into the import of their expedition. By 1984, no other American exploration group was as renowned as theirs, with Lewis and Clark becoming household names. In 2004, Gary E. Moulton compiled a comprehensive and precise anthology of their travel diary. Concurrently, the 200th anniversary of their expedition kindled a nationwide surge in interest in their narrative. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more content.